it going, everybody? I know we got one prayer request in the chat already. And we'll wait a couple of minutes for people to get here. Regarding someone with gallstones, I've had those. I had those when I was about 30-something years ago. I'd have mine removed. They said it was grit and getting into places it didn't belong. So out it came. Didn't know much else about it at the time, but you can't exactly put it back in later. So, good to see everybody, and we finished our series on controversies. Sorry, and now we're going to start on prophecy, and I'll be following the book, but I wanted to preface it with some reminders today. Outcast and Chow, I'm pretty sure I said hi to everybody else. Excuse me. So what I wanted to do is read some verses, because as we know, there are a lot of people who don't think prophecy study is worth the effort, because it's controversial, because it's confusing, because it can be taken so many ways. And yet I've found that Christians can't even seem to agree on salvation half the time, so none of those excuses are why we shouldn't study prophecy. And as I'm going to show in these verses, what kind of bride are we as the bride of Christ if we don't look forward to the wedding, don't care if the groom comes? That's just a major red flag. So, we're going to read through some things and think about, as I'm reading, the Jewish wedding analogy, which I believe Jesus is using on his monologue at the Last Supper, where he's talking about in terms that are, well, if I'll just describe the wedding, I know most of you guys have heard this before, the wedding customs, and then I'll read the verses. There was a betrothal, and then the groom goes off to his father's house to prepare a place for the two of them. He adds on a room or rooms, and while he's doing that, the bride is preparing. She's getting ready for, she's going to be moving out of her house, and usually it took a year, typically a year, that she had to get everything together and prepare for her new life and be ready to go at any moment, because she didn't know. I mean, she knew generally it was going to be a year, but she had to be ready and not know the day or the hour. And the groom didn't know the day or the hour, because it was determined by whether the father, whose house he was building onto, approved the new room. So as soon as he got the father's approval, he would get his friends together, and since it was usually in the middle of the night for whatever reason, they would get torches, they would blow trumpets, and they would shout. This is how the bride could know that he was coming. When she heard the shout and the trumpets, she would know that his arrival was imminent. And when the groom and his entourage got there, they would wait outside the house. They didn't go in and get her. They waited for her to come out. And then they would all go back to the father's house. Everybody else would party while the couple spent 7 days in seclusion. And then at the end, they would come out, and the groom would present the bride without the veil on her face so that everybody could see her face, and they would have this days-long party. And so think of that, a wedding analogy, that custom that was going on when you read these verses. We'll start with John 14 at the Last Supper, when Jesus says, "Don't let disturbing thoughts fill your minds. Trust in God and trust in me. There are many residences in my Father's home. If there weren't, I wouldn't have told you that I'm going there to prepare a place for you. Once I've prepared a place, I will return to you and accept you as my own, so that you can be where I am." And just to stop real quick to say, this is one of the reasons we know there's a separate event that isn't the second coming per se, or it isn't the last of it when he actually touches down on earth, because then he's bringing all of us with him to the wedding feast at the end of the 7 and bringing us to earth for this wedding feast. Whereas here, Jesus says, I'm preparing a place for you, and I'm going to come and get you before the 7 to take you to be with me, not me coming to be with you. So it isn't the same as the Holy Spirit coming at Pentecost. Jesus said, I have to go away, but I won't leave you alone. I'll give you the Comforter, because preterists especially will try to say that that was the second coming. And so we can tell right here from Jesus' own words that that's not the case. He says, I'm going to go prepare a place. This happens before the wedding. And then he comes to get her. And then he comes, or he brings her, she comes out, and he go back to his father's house for 7 days, and then they come out and have this wedding feast. And then when, before this, when Jesus was speaking to Mary and Martha, when Lazarus died, their brother, Jesus said to Martha, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever puts their trust in me will live again, even if they die. And why does he add this? Everyone who lives and puts their trust in me will definitely not ever die. Do you believe this? Why would he say that twice if it meant the same thing? That's because it doesn't mean the same thing. So the first thing is, even if someone dies while they have faith in him, they will live again. But if they don't die and they live, they're still alive and put their faith in him, they will not ever die. So he's talking about coming again, because Martha had asked him, she said, well, I believe there's a final resurrection, basically. That'll be Atchin and Chow and Matthew, Easton and Martin, whoever else I didn't mention earlier in the chat. And so, because he was about to raise Lazarus, and he asked her if she believed the dead would rise. She said, sure, at the end. And he said, this. So, everyone who lives and put their trust in me. It doesn't say live by believing. That's a bad, inexcusable translation in some of the versions. So we got that to think about. And then 1 Corinthians 15:50. What I'm trying to tell you, brothers and sisters, is that flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God, and the mortal cannot inherit the immortal. Look, I'm telling you a secret. We will not all be laid to rest, but we will all be transformed. In an instant, in the blink of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, the dead will be raised immortal, and we, the living who are left, will be transformed. Again, this mortal, the dying, must be clothed with immortality. So, nobody can go to heaven without being immortal. And this happens when the shout and the trumpet, we'll get more details later. When those happen, the dead in Christ, those who died believing, like Jesus said to Martha, will be raised first. And then all of us will be transformed in the blink of an eye, and then we'll be taken up to heaven. And 1 Thessalonians 4:13, now, brothers and sisters, we don't want you to be ignorant about those who have died, so that you don't grieve like the rest who have no hope. For if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, so also will God raise the dead through Jesus. We tell you this by the word of the Master, that we who are alive when the Master appears will not be in line in front of those who have died. For the Master himself, and here's the details about the wedding analogy, Master himself will descend from heaven with the loud command of the ruling angel and the trumpet of God. Those who were united with the Anointed One when they died will rise first, the dead in Christ, so to speak, and then we who are alive will be snatched away at the same time with them in the clouds to meet the Master in the air. Then we will always be together with the Master. So comfort each other with these words. We're not waiting for him to come down to earth. He's coming to the sky, raising the dead, transforming the raised dead and the living who belong to him to immortal in an instant, and then taking us up to be with him for 7 years. And then we all come back at the end of the tribulation, and there's a wedding feast. You can read that in Revelation, and we will later. Revelation 3:10 is the letters to the churches, and it says, since you guarded Philadelphia, the word of my endurance. held fast to it, kept it safe and pure. I will also guard you out of the hour of trial, that's the time, and here's the place, that is about to come upon the whole inhabited world, and here's the purpose, to test all who live on the earth. We've been tested in this life. All the Christians of every generation since there have been Christians in the first century have been tested for our works, but not our faith, because faith is a gift. And everybody who has that, who's accepted that gift, will be taken up into the clouds to meet him, and he will take us to his Father's house in the places prepared for us, as Jesus said at the Last Supper, and we'll be there for 7 years. And then 2 Timothy 4:8, at last the righteousness award, or crown of righteousness, is reserved for me, which the master, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day. On that day, and he's, look at the context there, and not only to me, but for also to all who eagerly anticipate his sudden appearance. This is getting to the heart of why we study prophecy. Do you long to see the groom? Does the bride wish to see the groom? Doesn't the bride prepare, look out the window, dream of the day, invite people to the wedding? And the time that she's waiting, however long it is. So how can anybody be disinterested, as most of the church apparently is, looking for signs of Jesus' return? Why don't we keep reading his letter to us about these things, about his return, and ignore Revelation 3:15, which says, I've seen what you've been doing. You're neither hot nor cold. If only you were one or the other. Now, this is talking in immediate context to a church which has become apathetic, which is exactly the situation we have now. For the most part, the people in the churches are apathetic about prophecy at best. Neither hot nor cold. Apathy. How can that be if the bride of Christ is truly the bride of Christ, that she isn't eagerly awaiting, but she's apathetic? He'll come, he'll get here when he gets here. I mean, that's just wrong. So, the point I wanted to get across in all this is that prophecy study is what a real bride does, looking for the signs to look for when to expect him. Now, there are no signs for the rapture, but we will see the signs of the tribulation that will quickly follow. Now, how quickly, nobody knows. I do anticipate a gap of some time between the rapture and the start of the tribulation, which, as we'll learn in the subsequent studies, only begins when a 7-year covenant is enforced by the Antichrist with Israel and many. That's what marks Daniel's 70th week, and we'll get into that later. But the thing is that that's when it starts, but that doesn't mean the rapture happens immediately before that. It could be years. Some people anticipate possible decades. I'm not sure I go that far. I think it may be at least several. So we have to understand that the tribulation doesn't begin immediately. We also understand the times we live in, where there are studies and videos done where people see that the plan of world history is not just, hold on a second, what happened to Matthew Eastman? I'm not sure why that happened. Suddenly you got banned, and I don't know why. I can try to get you back in. If you want to say something, James Mason, why that happened, I don't know. Before I'll go try to unban him. Because, okay, slip of the thumb. Hold on one second. I have to try to get to my channel and unban him, because I don't want him to be banned this whole time that I'm talking. So let me go. I got to go to YouTube Studio. And the settings, they just bury this deep. Community and blocked hidden users. It would be nice if they put these in some kind of order. They're just a hodgepodge. So now I have to do a search. And it doesn't seem to want to find it. Sorry for the delay. I just want to see if I can find him real quick. And it's not easy to find names in these tiny little windows. You can't resize the window. This is just stupid. Let's see. I'm looking for Matthew Eastman. I got to remember who I'm looking for. Let's see. Why am I not finding him? It says he was hidden, but I don't see him. Yeah, I'm not seeing him in the list here. I don't know what happened there. It says he was hidden. Man, I wish you could scroll through this easily. Oh, come on. You got to be somewhere in here. Sorry. I don't know. I can't find it right now. Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't know what happened. I guess you were able to unban him before it went too far. Cool. Alrighty. So what I want to do is also real quick, I want to read, let's see, one more verse that I forgot to add in here. That is, well, not one more verse, but one more passage in 2 Timothy 4. I'll just go up here and find them. 2 Timothy 4. Oops, 4. And we're looking at 1 to 4 here. I solemnly charge you before God and anointed Jesus, the one who is about to judge the living and dead, and in view of his sudden appearance and kingdom. Okay, there's a sudden appearance and there's a kingdom. The sudden appearance means, there's not a long delay. So, anything that, you understand the meaning of suddenly. Something unexpected usually, whereas the second coming isn't a sudden appearance. It's anticipated. You can see the sequence of things that have to happen before he returns, but there's a sudden appearance. It's not the same thing. Proclaim the word, stay at your post, whether it's convenient or not, refute, rebuke, encourage, and teach with the utmost patience, for the time will come when they will no longer tolerate sound instruction, but will collect teachers who tell them only what they want to hear. In fact, they'll turn away from truth and toward fables. So we have to be careful that we're not one of those people that's looking at fables, and that we're studying the word to know how to tell what's a fable and what isn't. Hey, Wendy, good to see you too. So, with that backdrop of why Christians should study prophecy and why they should be eager like a bride waiting for her groom to hear the trumpet and the shout, and not, as some people do, get absolutely bent out of shape for anyone saying there's a pre-trib rapture. I don't understand that at all, because it's biblical. It's something Jesus taught with the wedding analogy. It's something Paul taught that is aside from and separate from anything promised to Israel, and that there is a crown of righteousness for anyone who longs for his appearing. So there's no reason not to study prophecy. It takes up a third of the Bible almost. So if a third of God's word to us is prophecy, I'm pretty sure we should study it. There's a statement about the elect. I've seen some folks misrepresenting the elect from Scripture, telling their audience that it means elected official. Yeah, wow. No. They think that an election is only a political term, when in fact it's one of several ways to say chosen or selected, and that God has had selected people, various individuals, and then he chose Abraham, And then Isaac, then Jacob, and his 12 sons, and the 12 tribes were chosen. And they will remain chosen until God finishes all the prophecies to them, which have not been completed. And then he has also chosen us as Christians from Jews and Gentiles, and so we're the elect as well. But anyway, now we're going to start with the list of prophecies. And I'm pretty sure if you don't have that link, I'm pretty sure you do. When do you not have a link? So prophecy list is the first one in the, I'll just show you real quick the book, the topical studies book. And we've gone through controversies and we're in list of prophecies. So what we're going to do is, since I spent part of the time, I wanted to introduce the whole topic study of prophecy as valuable, worth our time, and something that should naturally happen for any saved person who can't wait for Jesus to return. That's how it should be with a bride waiting for her groom. And that we will, in fact, hear a trumpet and a shout of the archangel. So that's the why, that's the motivation. And now here's the overview of prophecies that remain as far as I've been able to list. And some of these may or may not remain, but it's best to err on the side of caution, starting with the Psalm 83. Some say that it's just an imprecatory prayer. Others that it happened in the past and therefore it won't happen in the future. But happening in the past doesn't always mean it won't happen again. We have plenty of precedent for dual fulfillments of prophecies, not the least of which is a very easily confirmed one biblically and historically with Antiochus Epiphanes, who desecrated the temple. He was a vile person who fit the description of the Antichrist in almost all the ways, not quite all the ways. He desecrated the temple in Jerusalem by sacrificing a pig on the altar. He erected a statue in the temple or in front of it or something nearby of Zeus, only the face was altered to show his face. And so Jesus pointed to also to what Daniel calls the Abomination of Desolation, which is desecrating the temple. That Antiochus Epiphanes fit this almost exactly, but Jesus said, this is going to happen. So it did happen and is going to happen, and there's no doubt about that. And Titus, the Roman, who sacked Jerusalem in AD 70, didn't do either of those things. He didn't declare himself God, and he didn't desecrate the temple. But the temple was torn down, as Jesus said. So, and thank you for that, Wendy. Anybody else also who's telling people about the channel, because I'm sure somebody will get something good out of it, or you wouldn't keep coming back. But yeah, we are definitely in what they call interesting times. So yeah, we should study prophecy for that reason as well, to know the times we live in. So anyway, back to Psalm 83. It says that the enemies of Israel intend to band together and wipe it off the map. And then it lists the names, which I think is a bit too specific for just an imprecatory prayer as just that and nothing more, which is why I included it. And these areas correspond roughly to modern-day Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, Gaza, Syria, northern Iraq, and possibly parts of Egypt. Now these are, and I didn't get the maps out or anything, but I may later in some of the prophecy studies, but basically these nations are immediately bordering Israel. Of course, on the west side, they're bordered by the Mediterranean Sea. But the thing is that all of these nations are immediately surrounding Israel. So that's the narrower band of the bullseye, Israel being the bullseye, and then you have the first ring around that. That's these nations. Then later, that expands out to basically as far as north as Eastern Europe. So whether you think this is going to happen again or not, and I have a sequence later. This is just a list, okay? This is just a list of things that may have a fulfillment awaiting. This one may or may not, but others are more definite because they simply haven't happened. And it's very inconsistent of preterists to say that everything up to 70 AD was extremely literal, hyper-literal even, but nothing after that could be literal at all. So, there's Psalm 83. And then there's Isaiah 17, the oracle or prophecy against Damascus, the city of Damascus. It will no longer be a city, suddenly, overnight, but it will lie in ruins replaced by grazing flocks. So some people try to say this is a nuclear blast, but the grazing flocks, okay? Not wild animals, but grazing flocks. So people won't live there, but it will be so leveled that it will just be open fields where people can graze their flocks. So I don't believe it's a nuclear blast, even if one wishes to argue over whether nukes actually exist or whether they're just really big, powerful explosions that have nothing to do with radiation. And the radiation is used to just scare people away. There's even a science fiction movie about that whose name I can't remember, had Tom Cruise in it. But they were basically kept out of a certain area being told it was irradiated when in fact it wasn't. They were just having things hidden from them. So it will happen when the glory of Israel has faded almost to the point of death, and that day will be when people turn to God. And we have to be careful that these are often what you call telescoped. Oblivion's a good word. Prophecies are telescoped, where they're seeing the highlights, not necessarily one happens immediately after the other. It's the sequence, not the timing. Now, I did update my chart, and so I'm going to try to get to, try to get to my images, because I did update my Rapture chart, this one, if you can see it. I'm going to go drop that for a minute. And what I did is, let me zoom in on this a little bit. I put Isaiah, let's see, where did I put Isaiah 17? I put that at the end. I have Ezekiel 38 here, but I kind of put Isaiah 17 over here because Israel is near extinction, I think, is a really important point. Oh, Oblivion. Okay, thank you. I didn't even make the connection. I only saw it once, and it was a long time ago. Yeah, thanks for that. Good on Chow for remembering the name of a movie. Let's see, and Wendy says, beginning to wonder if certain aspects of Scripture and prophecy are regional specific until that one great event of the whole world. I'm sure there are some regional things. Obviously, Psalm 83 is regional because it tells the nations involved, and then the next wider area also names nations. So they're all, like I said, concentric circles around Israel, and of course, like you say, the big widest circle of the bullseye would be the whole world. Like we read in Revelation 3 from the letter of the Church of Philadelphia, was that it involved the whole inhabited world, so that's pretty descriptive, I think. So, yeah, I think there are things in various locations, especially since it centers on Jerusalem and Judea, and at one point the Judeans will be told to run away, and people in Judea, not around the world. You can't take Judea to mean the whole world. So, anyway, what I wanted to show the chart for is because I think this Isaiah 17 is at the end of the tribulation, because by that time, 2/3 of Israel will be wiped out. And beginning in the second half of the tribulation is when the abomination happens and the people are told of Judea are told to run away. And the ones who do are the ones who are saved out of it. The rest will be wiped out. And so I think that's when Isaiah 17 happens. Now, going back to here, so we've had Psalm 83, which may or may not happen. We know it's already happened in modern times when Israel was first formed again. Twice, I think it was. There was a 6-day war, stuff like that. So this is maybe, maybe not. I don't know. But this has not happened. And there's no reason to allegorize it. Okay? There's still people in Damascus living there. Yes, it's rubble, a lot of it. But there are people living there. It's not flattened where only flocks are grazing. So that's not been fulfilled, and there's no way, as I said, to spiritualize that into something else just because people want to say there's no prophecies remaining. They put their desired conclusion first. Then we have, and again, this is just a list, not a sequence yet, Jeremiah 37, and I'm not showing all of these because I want to make sure I get through the list. The day of the Lord will be a time of great trouble for Jacob, though he will survive it. God will save them out of exile where they were scattered among the nations. Whoever attacks Israel will be attacked, and the people of Israel would be numerous and prosperous. Obviously, that doesn't happen bam, 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 one, even year after another. So the day of the Lord will be trouble for Jacob, but he'll survive. He won't be, a third will come out of it all right. That if they're faithful, they'll run and be protected. And God will save them then. And he will bring them back to Israel. It doesn't mean they can't be there now, because they're there in unbelief, which is what the condition they have to be in before God is going to come and finish judgments against them. Why would he judge faithful people like that? He wouldn't. So if bad things are happening to Jacob, great trouble for Jacob, that means there's a lot of unbelievers there. So that's what we have today. And then after they're saved in exile, God will attack anyone who attacks them, and they'll be brought back to the land by God. So the formation, the Balfour Declaration and all that isn't the final fulfillment, but it's a necessary precursor to the tribulation. So I think you misunderstand infinity split. Enemies of Israel intend to wipe it off the map. Okay, correspond roughly to modern day Jordan, Saudi Arabia, etc. Okay, we're going by the geographical areas. And now there is some controversy over whether in prophecy you need to track migrations or keep them in their locations. And it seems to be more of a matter of locations in prophecy. So the ancients, those ancient other names being wiped out, and Israel still coming back after all that time is a major prophetic sign. Because after they were wiped out, nobody thought they'd ever be back again. And that's where it gave rise to people trying to allegorize prophecy and say that the church replaced Israel or appropriated its prophecies because they thought Israel would never exist as a nation again. None of these other ones did, and they still haven't as by those names. But there are people living there, and there's people living in Israel, but there wasn't even a land called Israel from 70 AD until 1948. So it's a prophetic sign, the budding of the fig tree, so to speak. But these areas happen to all be, possibly parts of Egypt, pay attention to that, enemies of Israel. Now, there are some wheeling and dealing that changes and goes back and forth whether they're cooperating with Israel, but when they speak in their Arabic documents and to their own people in their own language, they're not as friendly to Israel as the world's media would have us believe. And they would dearly love. They tried it when Israel was formed again in 1948 and in 67. Keep trying to wipe Israel out, the nations all around them, and it hasn't been successful. So, yeah, there are, nobody can say today, who is an Edomite, Ishmaelite, Moabite, etc., but there are people there of that descendants, of those descendants from those people groups, and they hate Israel. And that's the most important thing, is that they hate Israel. And then Isaiah 17, we've gone over, Jeremiah 37. And then there's Ezekiel 36 and 37. We usually concentrate on 38, 39. But there's some interesting stuff here too. It says, though they had been unfaithful and suffered punishment, Israel is promised revenge against all enemies and restoration of their land and people, not because they are good, but so that God would be glorified. So yes, they will be back in their land faithfully, but not before they've been purged. God will gather them from all the nations and bring them back. We mentioned a little bit of that in Jeremiah 37. God will change their hearts so they will keep his laws. In the vision of the valley of dry bones, God shows that this restoration will be in stages. The bones are assembled and are covered with skin, but they're not yet alive, and then God breathes life into them. And here again, we go back to this chart, the dry bones prophecy right here in the middle. This is the long band hooking everything together. The unified kingdom of Israel and Judah will be restored in stages, according to especially Ezekiel 37. So, all the tribes of Israel will join together, no longer divided in two, with David reigning over them, meaning especially a descendant of David, as God promised him. And then God will permanently put his temple there. We'll get into that later. There's an appendix on the prophecy book that's a tale of 3 cities, and one of those cities is called the Lord is there, separate from earthly Jerusalem, which is not the New Jerusalem yet during the millennium. And there will be a temple there and a priesthood of Zadok, who was the main priest during the reign of David. And there will be certain boundaries of the lands of each of the tribes, plus this, what a lot of people call a sacred district, where this temple is. So, regarding comment in the chat, it's absolutely gearing up to everything we would expect in the tribulation. Very, very satanic, and it's changing. We all know about the Hegelian dialectic, right, where there's problem, reaction, solution, or thesis, antithesis, synthesis. What they do is they have these political left and rights that it's like good cop, bad cop. Right now we're doing bad cop, but they want people to so hate bad cop that they will do anything good cop wants, and that's the Antichrist being set up for the good cop at first, as long as you go along. Anyway, Ezekiel 38 and 39, the prophecy about Gog of the land of Magog. Gog is the title of the ruler. In the far north, lots of latitude there for how far north. Ruler of Meshech and Tubal. The nations correspond roughly to modern parts of Russia, Iran, Northern Africa, Eastern Europe, and especially Turkey. Depends on who you ask and where people groups went, and whether we're going by migration or location. But here's what it says. God will put hooks in his jaw, that's Gog, and turn him and his whole army around, including those of Persia, Cush, Put, Gomer, and Beth Togarmah from the far north. Whichever way you want to take those lands, these are, Persia is Iran, Cush is, I think, Ethiopia, and all these other, or, possibly Turkey, possibly farther north in Eastern Europe. So there's going to be a leader called Gog of the land of Magog and the far north, that God will put hooks in his jaw and drag him around opposite of wherever he was to go someplace he doesn't really want to go. They will invade, this Gog of Magog and the hordes with him, so many nations, will invade a rich land that has recovered from war, whose people came from many nations to Israel, and were now living securely, peacefully, and unsuspecting. Right now, like I said, we're not getting into that much detail yet. We're just doing a list of prophecies yet to come. Mere protest will be offered by Sheba, Dedan, and the merchants of Tarshish. Sheba and Dedan are roughly equivalent to modern Saudi Arabia, while Tarshish may refer to areas as far north as Britain and the rest of Western Europe. So these people are just going to offer a mild diplomatic protest when this invasion happens. That's all they're going to do. They're not going to stop it. When Gog attacks Israel, there will be a great earthquake there, and it caused the whole world to shake with fear in the presence of God. So people know something is up. Now, if let me back this out a little bit. That's a little bit too much, but if the seals are the beginning of sorrows, which they seem to match up if you go to Matthew 24 and Revelation 6 through 8, at least for the first 5 verses of 8. This sequence matches up. False Christ, Gog-Magog war, famine, death of a fourth part of the earth, whether that means a fourth of the population or a quadrant of land, I don't know. Nobody does. Many martyrs, cosmic terror. And that's why I want to look at this right now. And then, of course, the 144,000 are sealed. We'll get back to that later, but in a later lesson. But cosmic terror, and then we read here, we're still in Ezekiel 38 and 39, there will be a great earthquake and the whole world will shake with fear in the presence of God. Now, the cosmic terror are coming from above, and that's when they hide in their deep underground bases and say to the rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of the one on the throne and the wrath of the Lamb, for the day of their great wrath has come, and who can stand? So there's always things matching up, and Revelation especially will draw from several hundred Old Testament prophecies, which is why we need to read those. Point 5, God will cause the invading army to turn on itself. So they've gone there to take a plunder from a nation that has recovered from war and dwelling securely, which I think may be the aftermath of the 7-year covenant, where they get to rebuild their temple and they lay down their arms in exchange for this assurance of peace and protection by deal with the devil. There is a passage in the Old Testament that says of Israel, we have made an agreement with death and the grave, words to that effect. And that's what they're going to do. The good cop, they will take for their Messiah, because he'll bring peace. But Gog of Magog in the far north will see this and go, let's go plunder them while they're vulnerable. So that's their motivation. It's different from the motivation of Psalm 83 or Ezekiel 17. Different motivations. So this one is strictly, these people are vulnerable, they laid down their arms, they've got wealth, and we're going to go take it. But God will cause them to turn on themselves, and there will be plague, torrential rain, hail, and burning sulfur that destroys the army on the mountains of Israel and in the open field, where the carrion birds and wild animals will consume their remains. And this is the macabre feast that we'll read about later in Revelation, when at the end of the tribulation, also when all these things have to be cleaned up. And this is something I have here too, where, let me blow that up a little bit. This is, I think Ezekiel 38, 39 is kind of split, because certain nations, which we've listed earlier, will try to plunder them. But there's an entirely different situation at the end of the tribulation, where, along with Damascus being uninhabited, we have that, where did I put it? Gog and Magog and all the nations of the earth surround Jerusalem and are destroyed by different means than we just read here about the fire and brimstone. So as far as your question, Fiber Oats, as far as history and science go, I don't know that you'll find one. I have a New Testament translation, but it doesn't get into that sort of thing very much, because it's New Testament and they just don't get into that. But I do have a book study. If you look at my book studies, I did do a paraphrase of the first few chapters of Genesis that you might be interested in. If you could find that link, Chow, the Bible studies, either the written or the video of Genesis 1 to 3, I think it is. I think Fiber Oats would like that link. I really appreciate it, Chow. So anyway, back to here. And then God will send down fire on the land of Magog and those who live safely on the coastlands. Nobody knows what that means, the coastlands. It could be quite a number of different things. This event causes all Israel to know that God is the Lord, and the world to know that Israel has been punished for its sins. So again, this kind of places that part of Ezekiel's prophecy of Gog and Magog at the end of the tribulation. So looking again at the sequence, we have a Gog-Magog thing happening, I think, possibly here in the maybe the agreement's been made, or, at the late part of this and this happens. I'm not sure. This is kind of iffy. But we also know that there's a Gog Magog before that, and then at the end. There are two different events involving Gog and Magog, and some people take Gog and Magog as references to any major army being led directly by Satan. So we'll get back to all those details another time. But people from the towns of Israel will collect the weapons and burn them for fuel for 7 years. Now, I kind of don't think that's happening in the new heavens and new earth after the millennium. Pretty sure that's not going to be the case, because at the end of the tribulation, or the end of the millennium, is the final white throne judgment. And after that, there will be no more death. And death itself will be thrown in the lake of fire, and everyone will be judged, and that's the end of mortality. So there would be no, and not only that, the new heavens and new earth after that's done, or about the same time, so there won't be any bodies to bury. So it can't be the end of the millennium. So is it at the beginning? Possibly. It's either, in my opinion, either the beginning of the millennium or the beginning of the tribulation, before things have gotten too bad. Anyway, people of Israel will spend 7 months burying the bodies in the east, in the valley east of the sea being probably Mediterranean. Then conduct a more thorough search for any bodies or bones missed before. So 7 or 8 and 9 go together. So they're burning the fuel of the invading armies of Gog and Magog for 7 years and spending 7 months burying them all. And then God will restore Israel and remove their shame, settling forever in the land. Now, if this is a sequence, then restoring Israel and removing their shame, settling them in the land, seems to be something that happens at the beginning of the millennium. So, let's see. Oh, as far as Genesis goes, about science and things. That was the reason I was asking about that, because he wondered if there were translations he could trust on science in the Bible, and I thought he might like how I rendered it, how I understand it, using both the Hebrew and Greek, to try to figure out what's being said there, what the original is. All right, Ezekiel 40 through 48 is a description of the restored land and people of Israel, commonly attributed to the millennium. Okay, so 9 chapters have to be totally reinterpreted if they have happened or are just allegorical, which I don't believe. So the temple will be measured and described in great detail. I mean, it was in the vision. The glory of God comes upon it from the east, entering through the east gate. The altar is restored and purified. The sacrifice is reinstated. The priesthood is restored and dedicated. That's Zadok. The whole nation is to bring special sacrifices for purification after their judgment. The Passover and other festivals are reinstated. Water comes out from the south side of the temple toward the east, and it empties into the Dead Sea and turns it fresh. And sea life flourishes in it. There's just hasn't happened, and it's not an allegory. Trees along the banks bear fruit each month, providing food and healing. The boundaries of Israel are described: north as far as Damascus, south to just below the Dead Sea, west to the Mediterranean, and east. I'm pretty sure Jordan River, but that may be an error. It depends what is meant by the river there, because the Jordan doesn't leave much more area than they have now, and that's only a fraction of what was promised to Abraham. So that probably isn't right, but I'm being very conservative here. It could be the Euphrates, in which case it's a lot wider. So the 12 tribes are allotted their territories, as well as special area dedicated to God, which I told you about earlier, where the temple and priests are. And there's pasture land and the city in the center, and will be called the sacred city, or the Lord is there, and it's about 1.5 miles square. Not the same as the New Jerusalem. Again, we'll get back to that another time. Now here's the big one, Daniel 9:24 to 27. The prophecy is given of 70 times 7 years, 77s, and it has a purpose: to end and atone for sin, specifically for Israel, though, to begin eternal righteousness, seal up prophecy, which means to complete it, and to anoint and dedicate the most holy place. That's the temple. That's what the prophecy is about. So, first thing, the 70 by 7, first it says it's divided up into 7 of the 7s and then 62 of the 7s. That's 69. So it says 7 and then 62 from the command to rebuild Jerusalem after their exile in Babylon until the anointed one, the ruler, comes. So that was how much time we can see in hindsight between a decree to rebuild Jerusalem and when Jesus came. And then he was put to death after the 69 of the 70 weeks. The people of the coming ruler destroyed Jerusalem and the temple. That happened in AD 70, 40 years after Jesus ascended. So doesn't fit any timelines if somebody wanted to squeeze the 70 weeks into there. War and disasters will continue to the end. He, a prince that will come, this is the nearest prince in the passage, will confirm a treaty with many for the final 7. So this was Titus, a Roman general. Midway through the 7, so someone like that, probably a Roman official of some sort, midway through the 7, he will end temple sacrifice and desecrate it. Well, you have to have a temple and start sacrifices before you can desecrate it. So this is one of the reasons why I believe that the covenant that they agreed to with the Antichrist is going to involve not only laying down their arms, but doing so in exchange for having a temple and sacrifices. So he will make this agreement, but halfway through the 7, he will violate it and totally break it. And then he will come to his end. Then Daniel 11:30, starting in verse 31, though this was fulfilled in the past by Antiochus Epiphanes, as I mentioned earlier, Jesus explicitly stated that this abomination of desolation was also future. And so we can look at the past fulfillment to know what to expect. All right, so somebody's going to be a very vile person who is also very powerful, who will have large armies to lead and hate Israel with a passion. It says, a blasphemous king will desecrate the temple. That's the abomination of desolation. He will exalt himself above all gods, showing no regard for the gods of his ancestors, so not the Islamic Mahdi, they would never claim to be God, or for the one desired by women. This does not mean he doesn't desire women. It means a god or goddess or something desired by women as one way to take it. Or another way is that, some people will say, well, it means that Jesus, the Messiah, is the one that, all women up to Mary desired to have, and, to be the woman who would give birth to the Savior. But why, it doesn't make sense in this context, is why I don't kind of go there. I'm just saying there must be a goddess of some sort or God that he will also not give any honor to. Instead, he will honor a god of fortresses or strongholds or forces, something like that. It also says, I might be getting ahead of myself, he will be a master of intrigue, but I think we'll get to that. He will attack strong fortresses with the help of a foreign god, and will greatly reward all who honor him, making them rulers and distributing the land for a price. What's the land? It's always Israel. So he's going to conquer Israel and divide it up to his cronies. He will rapidly conquer many countries, including Israel, but Edom, Moab, and the leaders of Ammon will escape his conquest. So there will be some in the Middle East who he won't conquer. But alarming news from the east and north will cause him to set out in a rage, but he will fall between the Mediterranean Sea and the holy mountain of Zion. And that's basically the Antichrist, and he will be defeated in Israel, which he had conquered, and then he'll be defeated. Daniel 12 says, at that time, which in context is clear, it's the distant future, there will be unprecedented distress, but for your people whose names are in the book, they will be delivered. And Jesus said the same thing. He said, a time of suffering that was never been before and will never be again. Nothing has happened in world history that anybody knows about that could take the cake as far as being something that was the worst ever, and nothing ever came close to it. There have been many slaughters since the time of Christ. Anyway, multitudes who had died will arise, some to eternal life and others to eternal shame and contempt. This is talking about the white throne judgment. But Daniel is to seal up the words until the end. That is to say, they wouldn't be made widely known, explained, until the time that is approaching for them to be fulfilled. The fulfillment of these things will take 3.5 years and will end when the power of the holy people has been broken. This is speaking of the second half of that 70th seven. So the first 7 years, the 3.5, or the last final 7 years, 3.5 years, and then he breaks it, and then there's a 3.5 years of absolute terror for Israel and the rest of the world. The commencement of these things will be in the distant future from the time of Daniel. 1,290 days, which is about 3.5 years times 360-day years, prophetic years, will transpire after the abolishing of the daily sacrifices and the abomination. So that's how we know it's halfway, not only from Daniel 9, but also from here in Daniel 12. We're given the exact number of days. So regardless of how you take the length of a year, you count the days. From the abomination, the day that happens, everybody who's paying attention will know there's 1,290 days left of this. Yes, I have seen that there are plans for the third temple, and they have supposedly a priesthood ready to go, the implements ready to go. I think they have had their red heifer to purify the area first. That's a thing. All right, here we go. It's almost 3 o'clock. My clock's a little early. And then there's another 45 days after that for people to hang on for. And this again may be, some bits of prophecy to fulfill and having to do with cleansing the temple and stuff like that before Jesus actually enters the area. Amos 9:11-15, in that day God will restore the fallen kingdom of David in its ancestral land, never again to be uprooted. This has not happened. It's not an allegory. This will take place after the people are brought back from exile. And then Joel 2 is an interesting one, also about the day of the Lord. An extremely large army comes, laying waste to everything in its path, but keep paying attention. Their appearance is like galloping horses with the noise of chariots. They leap over the mountains and swarm like locusts, striking fear into everyone. The earth shakes before them, the sun and moon are darkened, and the stars stop shining. This army is led by the Lord. This is not the army of the 200 million in Armageddon, or not Armageddon specifically, but the second half of the tribulation. And in my opinion, this happens when, the final judgment, final bowl judgment has been given, and Jesus is coming back, and then there's that 45 days. I think this may happen in that 45 days where he leads this army of probably supernatural beings, of good angels, the armies of heaven, and the Lord will be leading this army in to cleanse the area before he comes in. Then a trumpet is blown. Remember what we started out saying an hour ago. And the bride and bridegroom are to leave their rooms. This is Joel 2. So again, with the wedding analogy that Jesus gave at the Last Supper, about going to prepare a place in his Father's house. And then they'll be there for a 7. It's a week in the literal wedding practice or custom. But obviously from context and prophecy, there's 7 years of tribulation. That's the 7 that we will be kept safe in heaven and then brought back down for the wedding feast. And that's when the bride and groom come out of their rooms. And then God promises to drive the northern horde away. That would be Gog and Magog and their army, other nations with them, driving them into both the Mediterranean and Dead Seas. Then God will pour out his Spirit on everyone, male and female. This is what Peter quoted on Pentecost. Then, after all that, there will be signs in the heavens, blood and fire on the earth. The sun will go dark, the moon will turn to blood. Oh, wait, before the great day of the Lord. So be careful when you're reading. It says all this stuff, and then there will be signs, and then it says before the great day of the Lord. We'll get into more stuff another time on trying to figure these sequences out. No, you do have to go to work tomorrow, sorry. Zechariah 14, a day will come when Jerusalem is plundered and divided up. This is the sacking of Jerusalem I mentioned earlier. All the nations surround the city and ransack houses and rape the women. It just says that. Half the city goes into exile. Then the Lord fights against them. And this is what he does to the army that overruns Jerusalem. Their flesh will rot while they still stand. Their eyes will be consumed in their sockets. Their tongues will rot in their mouths. They will kill each other in great panic. And a plague will strike their animals. So God doesn't mess around when it's time to get revenge against all these evil things that the Antichrist and the armies of the world against Jerusalem have been doing. And then his feet stand on the Mount of Olives east of Jerusalem, splitting the mountain in half. That hasn't happened. That day, there will be no sun or darkness, no distinction between day and night. Living water will flow from Jerusalem. So this is the end of all the judgments. Half to the Dead Sea and half to the Mediterranean Sea in summer and winter. And it turns the Dead Sea into fresh water, and there will be fish in it. The Lord will be king over the whole world. Jerusalem will never again be destroyed. And survivors from the attacking nations will visit Jerusalem each year to worship God and celebrate the festival of tabernacles. Those who refuse will suffer drought and plague. Again, this cannot be eternity, because this stuff doesn't happen after the new heavens and new earth. So this is the millennium, after the tribulation. And then we have, of course, prophecies in the Gospels. The gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. When you see Jerusalem surrounded by military encampments, you will know that its ruin is near. This is probably a dual fulfillment with the destruction in 70 AD and the future one. When you see the abomination of desolation as declared through the prophet Daniel, this is Jesus' own words, standing in the holy place, then those in Judea must run away to the mountains. So this is not the Christian church. We're not Judea. There will be terrible stress in the world, great rage against this people. We've already read that in the Old Testament passages. They will be killed in battle, taken captive to all the other nations. So there will be probably, it sounds like, another exile. Then Jerusalem will be trampled on by the nations until their time's up. So that's that 3.5 years, the second half of the tribulation. The suffering of those days will be unlike anything that has happened since God first created the world until now, and never will be again. This is Jesus talking in Matthew 24. In fact, if the Lord didn't cut those days short, no living thing would survive. But those days will be cut short for the sake of his chosen ones. It isn't clear whether it means the days themselves will be less than 24 hours, or whether the prophecy will be shortened to less than 3.5 years left, or whether the 3.5 years is itself a shortened thing. All are possible. Then there will be signs. Then there will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars. And on the earth, the nations will be filled with anguish. You remember Joel said before the day of the Lord? And this says after. Are they in conflict? No. Why can't it happen twice? On the earth, the nations will be filled with anguish and perplexity due to the roaring and turbulence of the sea. This is where you get the King James phrase, men's hearts failing them for fear. It's not just fear in general and heart attack rates rising. That's not what it is at all. People are not, they're being very sloppy when they try to say that. But instead, they will see the roaring and turbulence of the sea. In my opinion, it's like God is holding a bowl of water and starts shaking it. The world is a bowl of water that he starts shaking. You can imagine how terrifying that would be if you're looking at the oceans sloshing, not just tsunamis, right? Not just one big tidal wave, but going back and forth and back and forth. The roaring and turbulence of the sea. People will be deathly afraid and apprehensive of what's coming upon the whole world, for the forces of the heavens will be shaken. Then they will see Jesus coming in a cloud with great power and majesty. But when you see all this coming to pass, he's talking to Jerusalem here, he's talking to Israel, stand up and raise your heads, for you're about to be rescued. This, to me, is again the second half of the tribulation. They see all these things, but they should remember that when it's over, they will be rescued. In Acts and the teaching letters of the New Testament, We have James at the Jerusalem Council in Acts 15 quoting the prophet Amos that said, after this, God would rebuild David's fallen tent so that all mankind would seek God, including the Gentiles bearing his name. And then Paul in 1 Corinthians 15 and 1 Thessalonians 4:18, this is where the rapture is described. The Lord descends from heaven, the archangel shouts, trumpet sounds, the dead Christians raised in immortal bodies, the bodies of living Christians will be instantly transformed to immortal. Then we will all be snatched away into the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And this is a message of comfort and hope, not dread and suffering. So it's not the same event as the tribulation. In 2 Thessalonians 2, 1-12, Paul gives a sequence. The departure happens. This is the word apostasia, which depends on context. It means to stand apart or stand away from. And it needs context to tell you from what. In most contexts, it's about false teachings. And so this is apostasy is what we normally think of it, which is a transliterated word, not a translation, where we think of it as falling away from faith. And they'll say falling away in many translations, but there's no word for falling in the Greek. It just says the apostasia, the standing apart, the departure. It means departure. And in my opinion, this is the New Testament word for the rapture. We get the word rapture from the Greek or the Latin translation rapturo, which is the Latin equivalent of harpazo in Greek, which means to snatch like a robber. It's where we get the word raptor, which means robber. And it's when a robber snatches something real quick and then runs away. So this is why the rapture is said to be a snatching. It comes from the Bible, from harpazo and from apostasia. So the departure happens. That uses the definite article with it. The detainer that had been holding back the man of lawlessness is taken out of the way. The man of lawlessness, lots of thes. The man of lawlessness is revealed after that and identified by his desecration of the temple and declaring himself God, which happens 3.5 years later, or at least 3.5 years later, possibly more, but later. God sends a strong delusion on all who hated the truth, so they will be deceived. And it says the truth that would save them. So anybody who hated the gospel will be the victims of a strong delusion from God to those people. So if Christians are currently being deceived about something, that's not the strong delusion. Because God isn't going to deceive his own people. And these own people aren't the ones who hate the truth. So this happens to people who don't belong to God, from God, because they hated the truth. And then Jesus will defeat this man by the breath of his mouth and glory of his arrival. So he'll just speak and the guy is gone. And then, of course, Revelation. One of the letters to the churches to Philadelphia, we already mentioned earlier, states that they will be kept out of the time of trial to come upon the whole inhabited world. This to me is very obvious. It hasn't happened in the past. None of this has happened. Neither the time of trial nor the church being taken out of it has happened yet. So that's yet to come, and this lines up with anything else that has to do with being spared the wrath of God, which the tribulation is. And since the seals are opened by the Lamb of God, and it makes bad things happen on the earth, that's when the wrath of God begins. And so the wrath of God begins with the seals, and we have to be gone before that, because Jesus is not going to expel his wrath to his own bride that he just came for. When John is first taken to heaven in chapter 4, he sees a group of 24 elders, 4 to 6, wearing victor's crowns and white clothing. This indicates, the victor's crowns indicates humans who have overcome something, and the white clothing is righteous acts. We'll get into more of that later, another time. The 3 sequences of 7 judgments, the seals, trumpets, and bowls, will begin with numerous references to Old Testament prophecies. Jesus comes down to earth with the armies of heaven at the end to face the armies of the world that are massed against him, which is stupid. Satan is bound for 1,000 years during the millennium. That's all that Revelation says about it. You read more about the millennium in Ezekiel 40 and forward, as I mentioned earlier. During which time the beheaded saints from the tribulation will co-rule with Jesus. had his details later. Satan is briefly released at the end and gathers an army from all over the world, Gog, Magog, mentioned by name. The army is consumed by fire from heaven. That's not the way they die in Ezekiel 39. And Satan is thrown into the lake of fire with the beast and false prophet. The beast and false prophet were there at the beginning of the millennium. Satan joins them at the end. And then there's a great white throne judgment, and the dead are judged. Then death and Hades, the unseen, the holding place of the dead, are thrown into the lake of fire, along with all whose names are not written in the book of life. Then the present earth and heavens are done away with and replaced by new ones. They're consumed by fire and then replaced. Then the New Jerusalem descends out of heaven, but nothing is said about whether it touches earth or not, and there's no temple in it. So, I know that's a lot, but that's just a list. And you can go over the list anytime you want. So, next time, let's go look at the chapters. We will get into, we'll go back and look at preterism again. We've done that before. But today, if you didn't come until more recently, we started out with motivation for studying prophecy in the first place. And then we spent the rest of the time looking at all the things that are coming as a list, not as necessarily a sequence, and certainly not a timing. The only timing we know for sure is when that covenant is signed, the judgments go on for 7 years, and then begins the millennium. So, let me try to look at the chat now and try to catch up with any questions or comments, and then we'll get out of here because it's after 3 here. It starts at 2 my time. Let's see. Okay, we had some issues at the start. The dead must be raised first because otherwise it cannot be given a glorified body. I think there's a whole purpose for the detail being given. And also, for whatever reason, it's important to say that that happens before we get transformed. Others focus on details if there should be a period of time between both groups. I don't see any, how long does it take God to raise the dead? It doesn't have to take much time. And there's nothing that indicates a gap. I can't rule it out, but I don't know any reason for that. I have heard theories that when the dead in Christ are raised, and there'll be all this mass evangelism going on because people will see these dead raised to life. But curiously, there are no reactions or anything in any context to this alleged event. So I'm not going to try to propose that there's a gap of time. All I know is that yes, we have a sequence, not a timing, but it says in an instant we'll all be transformed. So we're all transformed at the same time. So I think, the dead are raised, they're given their bodies, and at the same time they get their new bodies, we get ours, and we all go up. So I kind of lean, I pretty much lean against the gap theory on the raising of dead Christians and then the transformation of living. Always miss you too, Wendy, and everybody else who doesn't get to come here often. And nice quote of Psalm 62, 1 and 2 there. And especially, I know, Wendy, you had some kind of procedure done recently, and I'm hoping, in our private chat, you can fill me in if you want to. If you don't want to, that's okay. I was kind of concerned I hadn't heard from you since then. Been probably a month ago. Okay. Complication after another surgery in April. Okay, let's all pray for Wendy to not have complications. Let's see. Misrepresenting the Elect. I did look at that earlier. Child's got the links. How do kleptomaniacs like their eggs cooked? Poached. Yeah, Soundly's with the puns. And again, thanks for referring people to the channel. And let's see. Vast knowledge during a teaching may slip through a thing or two you never knew. Yep, there's always something new to see. Yeah, there will be a how many temples there have been is some people argue over, but all I know is there will be a temple that will be desecrated, and then there will be a temple during millennium. The temple that will be desecrated will actually be illegitimate, but the Jews will think it's legitimate. So anyway, two more temples, two more physical temples, and then the third and final one will be the eternal one. Well, I mean, there won't be the third and final Jerusalem. Sorry, I skipped ahead there. But a temple during the tribulation, a temple during millennium, and then the New Jerusalem will have no temple. There won't be any need for one, or sacrifices or anything else. Let's see. Blessings today. Yep, it's a nice day. Let's see what else we got here. Yeah, again, I did mention about the fulfilled prophecies about Psalm 83. Families pitted against each other. Yep. Truth divides. That's what Jesus was talking about, of course, as you know, when he said, I came not to bring peace but a sword. And because people will split over him and over the truth of the gospel, and pretty much any other truth will split people. Let's see. Chow's got the links again. And that was a question about versions of the Bible. Yeah, Case for the Real Jesus. There's also the Case for Christ by, his name just escaped me. Can't think of a name. Lee Strobel. There it is, Lee Strobel. I think he's the one who also wrote Daniel and the Critic's Den, but I'm not sure. Let's see. Yeah, no, we wouldn't ban you for asking questions. You can tell when someone's a troll that they make it obvious, but I know that Fiber Rose isn't a troll, so. Let's see what else we got here. Yeah, that third temple, if you're seeing the third temple, you're probably in the tribulation, or it's about to start. Like I said, there may be a gap between the rapture and the signing of the covenant or enforcement of the covenant, and I'm convinced also that covenant will have to do with Noahide laws, which are bad news. They sound nice on the surface, but what they don't tell you is that people like us are the blasphemers who should be put to death. Hint, hint. So there may be, it's possible that the seals are the beginning of sorrows, which is the gap between the rapture and the tribulation. Not etched in stone, but that's what I think might be the case. So the blasphemous king is also called in one passage the king of fierce countenance, which means of a very imposing figure, who will also be a master of intrigue and the dark arts, who will, just rise the ranks as using flattery. So this will be a political maneuvering person with psychic powers and such that will win over the whole world in the earlier half, but then the second half things get really crazy of the 7 years. Let's see. Okay, we talked about the third temple plans. Let's see. Satan will have his worker bees out in force. Yes. Yes, they are absolutely preparing the world for the entrance of the Antichrist. Like I said about good cop, bad cop earlier. It's been bad cop. And all this stuff with various groups that I won't name or I'd get shut down probably, of promising that this or that person is maneuvering behind the scenes to get rid of such and such bad world leaders. There's no doubt that stuff is happening, but the problem is that the cure is worse than the disease. It will start out okay. A lot of people will be brought to justice, and things will seem to get better at first, but then they don't stay that way. So let's see. Yeah, I'm sure Fiber Rose was joking when he said about not having to go to work. Yep, we will have things to do. in eternity. We don't know what they are exactly. Lots of trickery. Yep. That's the first thing that Jesus said when his disciples asked him about the end times. He said, "Don't be deceived. Many will come in my name," etc., etc. So deception is the characteristic of our age and the thing to be expected in prophecy. So yeah, we're certainly on the doorstep of the tribulation. I can't imagine there being much more delay before the rapture. Oh, let's see. Our righteousness comes only from Jesus. Let's see. I'm almost caught up here, and then we can go. It's been a little longer than normal. Let's see. It's talking about being focused. Let's see. Almost there. Oh, thanks for being here also, Wendy, and everybody else, of course. Sorry I didn't see you until you probably already left a while ago. I don't think it was C.S. Lewis that wrote Case for Christ. I think it was Lee Strobel or somebody like that. I'd have to look it up, but let's see. Okay, with the push of digital world, metaverse, it really does seem like those Left Behind movies had a point with the VR glasses. Yeah. Yep, and they're going way beyond that. They're going to hacking the human brain. There's also plans I've heard of where the great grand plan is to first get rid of white people, then black and brown people, and so that the only people left will be Asians, specifically Chinese and Japanese, because they're used to being regimented. That was a quote from somewhere. I lost track of it, but they want regimentable people. And that's why all this racism and things is being pushed. It has nothing to do with people actually being racist. It's with the plan. Trust the plan, they say. Anyway, that's all I have, and it's been a long time, and I'm happy to see everybody. It looks like we had not many more people than usual. As many as 15 or 16, 15 people. That's still a terribly small number, but that what can we expect in these times? So, yeah, have people watch the videos later if they can't come during this time. I don't do super chat because I don't monetize my channel. It just bothers me to do that. I did for a short time a year or so ago, but it just bothered me. I don't like ads popping up on my videos, and there is a PayPal link somewhere, I think, in the description, if somebody desperately wanted to throw money at me. But I'm honestly, right now, we're not in need of funds. Hard to say what it'll be if the rent goes up in September, but I'm sure everybody else will be in the same boat. So there you are, and thanks everyone for coming. I really need to shut down, and we'll go on to preterism next time, and we'll see how far we get with that. You never know whether we'll get through one or two chapters at a time. But anyway, now I think the weekend after that is Memorial Day, and I may or may not run anything. If I do, it might be another premiere where it's pre-recorded and you can have a live chat, but I may or may not be there. So, thank you, Fiber Oats. Yes, you're always welcome here. Is there any situation where money and virtue go together? Well, certainly, if you use it properly, help the unfortunate, don't hoard it, pay people their wages. The Bible isn't against money. Many of the patriarchs were wealthy. What the Bible's against is people abusing their wealth. So anyway, yes, thanks to everybody for coming, and we'll see you next week, but I don't know what's going on the week after. So we'll catch you later.